So with the transmission cleaned, that's ready to work with, this is the next piece of the puzzle. This is the 2001 5.3 that I took out of the Silverado. And I don't know if I mentioned it before, but if I ever pull an engine out of a truck again, I will remove the intake manifold first, because I broke my map sensor. I didn't know it until I got the engine out, but I figured with a truck there would have been plenty of height to get the engine out, but with the oil pan as deep as it is, it got hooked on the back and broke that off. Not as big a deal as I really think. I mean, I was kind of pissed at myself for having that happen, but because I'm gonna supercharge, not on this one, turbocharge this engine, I'm gonna need a 2 or a 3 bar map anyway, and I'm just gonna end up tapping this for a fitting and running a vacuum line to a remote map sensor. So not as big a deal. I was also looking into maybe shaving this thing down. You know, I know people do it and it's still not pretty, but I think they look better than stock truck manifold. I mean, you can't beat this manifold for performance. They just work really well. And it's kind of depressing. I like those sheet metal looking intakes, but I haven't found anything where it says they're any good as far as compared to this manifold. They look great, but they don't even make as much power as these, so kind of silly. But anyway, this is as removed. It's dirty. It's got leaves on it. I saved my extensions off the manifolds. You have to remove the manifolds, which I know are going to be a pain in the butt because the bolts, I already tried one and it didn't want to move, and I'm going to have to heat them up and hope they come out. And anyway, I'm going to get it stripped down pretty good. Not totally, because right now we're just doing the mounts. So plan is to remove exhaust manifolds, remove the intake manifold just to make it easier to fly it around, remove the wiring, remove the front end accessories for the moment, and go from there. Again, this is my first LS build, so this stuff on these motors is all new to me. I got to label this harness as I take it off, partially through the tear down. Just been cleaning up the engine to make it so it's not a total dirt ball when I'm trying to work with it. Obviously pulled the intake, pulled the exhaust manifolds, pulled the AC compressor. Man, I must say, if you are going to do a LS swap, it's almost mandatory to have a MIG welder. I had 7 exhaust bolts broken on this thing. And the ones that broke and had a stub sticking out were harder to get out than the ones that were broken below the surface. The ones below surface that were broken before I even touched the engine, little MIG weld on them and they spun right out with a vice grip. The other ones with a stud sticking out, I'd heated them with a torch to get hot, let them cool down a little bit, and then try to get them off, and the heads broke off on the things. I tried welding nuts to them, kept breaking off. The only way they came out was to treat them as if they were below the surface and MIG weld to the stub sticking out and then put a vice grip on them. Then they came out. But I had a couple where I didn't know if they were going to come out. But they're all out now. So, but what a nightmare. I don't know what they do, if they put Loctite on those bolts or what the deal is, but they don't want to come out. So we're almost there. Got to get the front drive off the engine just to make it a little bit easier to work with as well. I don't know if I'm going to be using a big cooling fan or I'm going to use electric fans. I have to see when it sits in the car. So we'll come back after the accessory drive is off. We'll okay, so I'm in the middle of tearing the engine down, which is pretty basic stuff. But one thing I wanted to mention, because it's a pain in the butt, is getting these clutch fans off of here. They're on there tight, and it's hard to get any kind of leverage on the pulley. So here's what worked for me. I put a vice grip clamped onto the water pump pulley, threw a piece of wood here to hold against the vice grip, and then a 12-inch adjustable wrench. Put that on there, and then I had a piece of pipe on the wrench as well to get leverage. But I needed the block of wood here because without the block of wood, the vice grip would hit the water pump, but instead of locking against the water pump, it just kind of folded over and it wasn't working at all. But with the vice grip jammed straight up like that against the wood, I was able to get the fan right off. Now, I did put some heat on the nut beforehand. I don't know if it was needed or not. You could always hit it with like a propane torch to warm it up. I don't know if they had thread locker from the factory or not, but I just figured it was a good idea to put a little heat on it. But once I was able to lock that pulley with the vice grip like that, I was able to spin this right off of here. Now it's loose, obviously, because I already turned it, but with the wrench and the pipe on it, I was able to spin that right out of there. Looking like an engine now. Pretty much torn down as far as I'm going to go. I left the water pump on for now. There was, I don't think, any real reason to take it off yet, but I may take it off anyway. But it's cleaned up good enough to handle it without getting totally greasy every time I lay a finger on it. Turbo 400 is bolted up, just with the 5 bolts that are available on the LS. That upper passenger side bolt, there's no hole there. And from what I've read, behind there, I think runs into a cooling passage or an oil gallery or something, but you don't want to drill that and tap that. You'll wreck the engine, so it's fine with just the 5 bolts. Right now, there's no torque converter on the transmission. I still have the dished flex plate on there because this is just for mock-up. I need to get the engine mounts set up. And once it goes in for the final time in the end there, get into the things needed to get the 400 to work with the LS style engine. I think everybody knows about the different flex plates and stuff like that, but I'll go over it because it's all new for me, so I had to learn it all, and we'll get to lay it out and see how it works. As far as the car goes, the only thing I did was I clamped a piece of steel bar underneath the frame here just so there's something to support the transmission on when I swing it in. And with one person, being me, only here doing this, it's a lot easier that way because then I can at least have something to support the engine and the transmission in the back so I can put the car up on the lift and then get an idea of what I'm looking at for making a transmission cross member. The factory transmission cross member bounded up, bolted in there on both sides, and that's where I'll mount mine, hopefully. Just have to figure out what I need to make to get the angle. Ideally, engine will be with the tail of the transmission 3 degrees down, and hopefully we'll have oil pan clearance, and hopefully we'll have clearance for everything. But I don't know yet. I said I'm all new to LS's. I know that truck pan is a monster and it's very deep, and we'll have to see if it's going to work or not. The 55 Buick has a very tall engine compartment, so I'm hoping I can set the engine high enough where that pan will work. But if it looks stupid or the transmission's not going to fit in the tunnel right, well, we'll have to change oil pans. One thing that's pretty good, at least, or an advantage that I have not been doing LS swaps until now, is the aftermarket has really caught up, and not only are there Holley oil pans out there, but there's also other no-name pans out there that are shorter and a lot more reasonable in price. So if I need to switch pans and pickups, I can go with something like that. I mean, way back when people were just starting to do these, I remember guys cutting the bottom off the truck pans, welding them up, trying F-body pans, or trying all kind of things to get good oil pans that would fit in the chassis nice. So I'm hoping the truck pan will work, but we'll see shortly. Okay, here's the underside view of the first potential mock-up position. I was able to get my 3 degrees down on the drivetrain, so that's good. That matches the 3 up on the rear axle. I have plenty of oil pan clearance around my steering rack. I played with mounting this engine higher, lower, and bottom line is that the truck pan is not going to work. Again, where I'm running to things where I'm going to need a TIG welder, If I had a TIG, I could cut the bottom off this pan and shorten it. I don't, not yet. So rather than let the build stop or slow down, I did buy on eBay a low profile oil pan, no name, with a pickup and all that mess. It was only about 200 bucks, which is a pretty good deal, I think, because it used to be, there wasn't a whole lot other than Holley or make your own. So I think that's a pretty good deal, and that'll pretty much get the oil pan the same height as a transmission pan. Now, with the X-frame, as I said, I spent hours playing with this all over the place, more than usual, because it's just so many different things to look at in addition on this car. Because with the X-frame, obviously the drive shaft's got to go through the tunnel, so you're limited on how high or how low you can set your transmission, and that position is going to dictate your engine height if you want your angle to be 3 degrees. If you don't care about 3 and you want to go another angle, you have some leeway. And it's not exact. You don't have to get it exactly on 3. If you're 3 or 4 or whatever, degrees not going to make a big difference. But I wanted it at 3, so that's where it's at 3. So the transmission ended up here, and then that dictated where the front of my engine sat as far as height to get my 3 degrees. So right now I'm at 3 degrees. Now the other thing that came into play with this car was drive shaft. Now normally I make my own drive shafts. As I've said before, I'm also a hoarder. So usually the first thing I'll do when I start mocking stuff up is just take a quick measurement, get a rough idea of how long of a drive shaft I'm going to need to make sure I have one that's long, or at least that long, so I can shorten it to work. Well, I found one that would work. And you saw in the other videos where I had to switch the U-joints to put the flange on the rear for the 8.8 and my Turbo 400 yoke on the front. So the conversion joints are in, and it worked out good. Now, the next question, and what I was rattling in my brain a while, is critical speed. This drive shaft that I found is 3¼ inch diameter, which is not huge, but again, because of the X-frame, I'm limited. A 4-inch drive shaft, which would get me a higher critical speed, is going to hit the floor quicker than the 3¼ I have room. I've checked with this drive shaft, and I can raise it up, and it's got a lot of clearance. I mean, I should have no issues with suspension travel. But this may not be the final drive shaft. I may have to get a 4-inch one, and I have 4-inch Silverado aluminum ones. Again, need a TIG welder that I could shorten and make a 4-inch drive shaft and get my critical speed up. Critical speed, what that is the RPM where basically the drive shaft becomes unstable. So depending on your material of the drive shaft, diameter of drive shaft, and the length, you can get to a point where you're spinning so many RPMs that the drive shaft will spit. It'll start whipping, it'll oscillate, and you can spit the drive shaft out. This is the underside. I'm not done. I'm not claiming this is it yet or finished. I do know right now that my air conditioning bracket, the factory one, mounts to the block here, is going to hit this piece of the Jaguar crossmember. This is not needed. I can cut that off. What it is these Jags, when they were made to drive in England, they used a right-hand drive instead of left-hand drive. So the crossmember has mounts for the steering rack on both sides that just mirror each other. Don't need it. So I can cut that away and get me clearance. And then my factory AC bracket, which I have right here, I was sitting up against the block, that should fit fine. So the next things to check. So far everything's looking good, but now I have to just confirm up top what everything looks like. Here's the top view. So I showed you some of the stuff I was looking at underneath on the car as far as getting things set before make any kind of mounts. There's a lot of things to think about, because once you set it in place, it's there. So right now I have the engine where I like it. Like I said, the oil pan's not going to work. Okay, no big deal. It is what it is. With the tall truck intake on here, it actually looks pretty good. I was really concerned. The Buick engine compartment is very deep, and I was concerned that the engine was going to look lost in here. It's not looking lost with the truck intake. It looks good, and as ugly as the truck intakes are, I'm going to clean it up, and I think it's going to look okay. I think it's going to be okay. I have the engine centered right now in the chassis, and I still have to stick an exhaust manifold on this side and check my steering clearance, see how I'm going to route my steering from the rack to the column. I think it's a straight shot. It's going to work fine, but I have to double check. Sometimes moving an engine a 1/4 inch can be the difference between straight shot steering and having to put another joint in and more work. So we're going to do that. Right now I have the engine pushed all the way back against that lip on the firewall. So I'm going to trim that off and get myself, about a 1/2 inch clearance there, which is fine. Don't need that lip. It can go away. This side, because the head goes further back, it's a lot tighter because of that, obviously. But, this side, you got room for days. You can get to the bell housing bolts. There's no issues. You could get to those bell housing bolts easily from up here. Maybe not once the power booster's in, but it'll be fine. And the next thing I have to check, like I said, I already checked the AC bracket. I know I'm going to have to trim off part of that extra piece there that was for the right-hand drive steering rack, which is not in this car, obviously. So we'll make a little bit room for the AC bracket. I need to put my accessory bracket on here and make sure everything's clear in here and see if I have to cut away at the battery box. These cars had really long batteries from the factory, huge back then, so I can very easily cut that battery box in half and shorten it up to get more room, and there's still room for the standard battery to fit here. Or I may just end up putting the battery in the trunk, depending on if that gets me more room for routing of the air intake and such. I don't know. We'll have to see what it all looks like. There's a lot of room in the front of the engine, a lot more than I thought, almost to the point where it looks like it would be cool to do twin turbos on this thing with one on each side, because there's just so much room up front. You could do it, but I'm not going to do it on this car. This is my first turbo build. I need to just be somewhat calm and do it. But there's enough room here where, the original plan was to use a cast turbo type exhaust manifold on the passenger side and run a Y pipe behind the engine on the back. There is so much room here that, I could make my own turbo manifold and put a Y pipe up here in the front. I mean, there is just room for days up here. It's pretty crazy. So just something else I'll look at when it comes time. And so the next thing I'm going to do is check my accessory bracket, make sure that clears, and really just make sure 100% that I'm happy with everything. And once I decide if this is where the engine is going to be permanent, where it's going to live, we start on fabrication for the engine mounts and the transmission crossmember.